slowing sales as far as the EV sector is concerned. Earlier this week, Union Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal said, and I quote, "We're deeply committed to reforms and pained by EV sale drop, EV sale numbers." In fact, the Union Commerce and Industry Minister, Minister Goyal, of course, was suggesting that the sales of EVs has contracted. In fact, the sales of EVs, according to industry data, 7%. It contracted 7% year on year in the April to June quarter. In fact, sales of electric cars in June plunged 13.5% from the year earlier. There are fears that the Indian market might just be following global trends. In fact, after last year's euphoria, domestic sales have slumped to 20% growth in the January to June period. So the big question we are asking on the show today is, what's ailing the adoption of EVs despite government subsidies and SOPs in this sector? Is this a reflection of global trends around slowing EV sales, and how can it be arrested if India has to meet its electrification targets by 2030? We'll discuss that with our guest this evening, but let's first listen into what the Honourable Minister had to say earlier this week at a FICCI event.
I was pained when I saw the numbers of electric vehicles sold in India having fallen in this last quarter. I was truly pained. And I suspect nobody in this room would have possibly put in an effort कि मेरे सब employees को तो कम से कम मैं electric की तरफ move करवाऊं. Then automatically charging system will start growing. Automatically the ecosystem will improve. With scale, the cost of automobiles will come down.
And of course, to take the discussion forward, I'm now joined by Rajiv Singh, who's a partner, consumer and industry leader, Deloitte Asia Pacific. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for joining us this evening. I want to first pose this question to you. When you hear the Honourable Minister speak about his disappointment as far as the sales in the EV sector are concerned, what do you think is leading to that sort of a dip, given that you were mentioning that in the past 2-3 years, we've been able to maintain and sustain momentum in the EV sector?
So, Sumita, I think that you're right. The last 2 or 3 years, we saw significant growth when it came to EV penetration. I think the market was almost doubling for us over the last 2 or 3 years from an EV perspective. So I think that I know that last few months there has been a little dip. But I think from a slightly longer term perspective, if I look at the next 3 years, next 5 years, next 7 years, I think EV is still a very strong story. The only thing I would say is that we should not expect EV to double almost like it has been doing over the last few years. I think we need to moderate our expectations from EV, but it is still likely to grow at about a 30-40% growth rate in this year itself as well. So I am still hopeful and positive that we will see the growth when it comes to EVs from an India perspective, Sumita.
Right, Mr. Singh, let me also take you back to what the Honourable Minister said. He stated that the government is committed to reform, but however, he also spoke about companies not doing enough. They're not pushing enough in this sector. Where do you really see the gap here, given that the government has been largely supportive of the EV sector? We've seen the famed subsidy scheme as well, and of course, there's been a scheme in the interim as well.
So, Sumita, I think there are a couple of things. I know that the government is trying to push a lot, but I think we need to also learn from what has happened, say, globally, or what has happened in some of the other countries where specifically the EV penetration is significantly higher. So, Sumita, if I take you, say, for example, China, where we have seen a significant amount of penetration from an EV perspective, what has China done differently? China is not just focusing on BEV alone. So China calls it now as new energy vehicles, NEVs. And they have clubbed all the kind of vehicles. So whether they are electric vehicles, whether they are plug-in hybrids, whether they are flex fuel vehicles, or whether they are hydrogen fuel vehicles. I think what the government is trying to do is put all of them together under one bucket and trying to give similar kind of a subsidy or a very similar kind of a level playing field for the consumers to choose which is the powertrain that they would like to go ahead with. Now, that is a big shift, because the moment that was done, we saw significant amount of penetration going up from a China perspective. But let me tell you, when we say a very high penetration of EVs in China, it is primarily 1/3 of it is contributed by what is called as plug-in electric hybrids, Sumita. So I think that the need of the hour is also to see how are we looking at alternate powertrains and giving the choice of the powertrain in the hand of the consumers rather than looking at only BEV alone in isolation, Sumita.
Right, Mr. Singh, but let's also talk about the private sector's participation. How can private players really boost investment in this sector and really can help in the uptake of EVs and adoption of EVs?
I think, Sumita, the private sector's players are investing a lot of money, but they are challenged at this point in time because it's not just one segment of, say, BEV that they are investing money. Some of them are investing money into plug-in hybrids as well. Some of them are investing money into hydrogen and into flex fuel vehicles as well. So I think it's a mix of multiple kinds of powertrains into which they are investing money. I think what we need to do is think from also a consumer perspective. So the private players need to play a role there in terms of how to make the consumers comfortable with this change in powertrain that we are expecting to happen. There is still a lot of concern that consumers have, whether it is from a perspective of range anxiety or it is from a perspective of lack of charging infrastructure. So I think those are the other areas that we need to focus on, Sumita.
Right, Mr. Singh, I want to also understand from your point of view when you say that, consumers have anxiety as far as, charging is concerned, charging infrastructure is concerned, there is range anxiety. Of course, the cost of EVs is 1.5 times the cost of ICE vehicles. So I want to understand from your point on how and what policy measures can be really adopted. What are your expectations from the government? What kind of a push is the industry expecting and looking at from this budget?
I think, Sumita, what maybe within the budget or maybe in the GST Council or wherever the decisions are taken, say, but I think that we need to try and see how we can position as an alternate to EVs, plug-in electric hybrids in a equal manner, or if not in an equal manner, at least in some measure, I would say, because I still truly believe that plug-in electric hybrids which are there, and they are different from the hybrids that we see in the Indian market today. These plug-in electric hybrids are the vehicles which have a battery, a significant size of battery, which may give you 200, 250 kilometers of range on battery alone. And once the charge on the battery gets over, for whatever reason, say you're driving a long distance from Bombay to Goa, or you're driving from Delhi to Jaipur, then there is an engine which takes over, which is a petrol engine, and that gives you another whatever 100, 150 kilometers on petrol. And petrol is not a problem because every few kilometers you will have a fuel pump. So basically in China, for example, what we have seen is that these plug-in electric hybrids have, to a very large extent, solved the problem of range anxiety in the minds of the consumer. In India, for example, most of the people who buy EVs are the people who buy it as a second, not necessarily as a first car. Right? But in China, we are seeing, for example, a lot of people buying these new energy vehicles, as we call them, or as plug-in electric hybrids, as the first vehicle of their choice, because they drive it like an electric vehicle for all practical purposes. And whenever they are going on long distances, they use the petrol engine for that. So it's a good bridge, simple, and try and see that can we have something which is supporting other new age vehicles as well.
It's a good bridge. Certainly, it's a good glide path.
Absolutely. I think it's a perfect
right.
bridge.
When you say that it's a good bridge, these... Right. So when you say that it's a good bridge, it's a perfect glide path towards moving in the EV direction. But the government really has targets of 30% electrification by 2030. Do you think if we move with this strategy, that target will be met?
I think given that we are in 2024, 30% is a little stretched, but rather than ending up at about, say, 10% or 12% by 2030, I would say this glide path would at least get us closer to, say, 16, 18 or 20% by 2030. And this glide path will also give some time for the charging infrastructure to come up in the country, for consumers also to change their thinking towards this powertrain and feeling more comfortable with it.
Right. Right, Mr. Singh, let me ask you one final question before we let you go. What is your forecast then for coming months? Is this some sort of a blip that's just coming, considering that there have been discounts being offered by automotive companies in the auto sector as well? And that might also be having some sort of an impact on EV sales.
Sumita, I think that the last 2 years was really a time where there was a significant amount of growth because of the pent-up demand. And globally, what we are seeing is that the pent-up demand, which was there for goods, has softened out to a significant level. And there is more spend happening towards experiences now. I think India is no different. We are seeing that pent-up demand for vehicles similarly softening in this year. But let's not forget that we had a fabulous last year, and hence we are comparing with a very large base as well. I think overall, if I look at passenger vehicles and it grows in single digits, say 3%, 4%, I think we should be good with it because it's already on a large base. And within that, Sumita, if I look at within electric as a portfolio within that, I think electric will grow. We will have to wait for this festival season to come in, and we will see some growth definitely from an electric perspective. May not be like what we saw in the previous 2 years of doubling, but I think 30%, 40% we should expect from an EV perspective.
30 to 40% growth is what you're saying, Mr. Singh, that we should be expecting as far as the EV sector is concerned. You're, of course, referring that the present dip as it is being seen in the sector is just a short blip, but of course, the growth trajectory continues. And of course, the industry is hoping for a sustained momentum as far as the government's reforms are concerned. But much really needs to be done by the industry as far as adoption by consumers is concerned. On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for joining us this evening and suggesting and discussing the way forward for the EV sector.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.